One of my favorite aspects of the Wii is its backwards compatibility with the GameCube. You put the disc in and it works, but that's all it can do. No enhancements of any kind, it doesn't even record the playtime on the Wii message board, despite having the setup to do it. But this all changed in 2012 with the release of Devolution. Devolution was like a premium homebrew experience. This GameCube loader enabled full use of the Wii's hardware to enhance games in practically every way that was possible, with main purpose being to play games directly from an SD card or a USB device. But beyond all the enhancements, Devolution has a few problems. Not every game runs as well as you'd expect. Instead of games running at the full capability of the Wii, they have to share the CPU with Devolution, and this ends up making some games not perform so well. I modified this game so I would show the current frame rate in the timer displayed at the top. While GameCube mode seems to shift a lot between 20 and 30 FPS, Devolution is almost always stuck at 15 FPS, with Nintendont allowing for a more stable 30 FPS and even performs decently with my 60 FPS mod of the game. Other games have problems due to spec differences between the GameCube and the Wii, such as the audio sync problem in Sonic Mega Collection. Star Wars Rebel Strike is another problematic title that has excessively long loading times only when played in Devolution. On top of that, a design oversight in Devolution is that with a Wii Remote connected, it will act as part of the GameCube controller, because when it turns off due to inactivity, it triggers a controller disconnected command, before immediately connecting the controller again. This leads to input getting randomly stuck while playing with a GameCube controller, and it also makes some games annoyingly trigger the pause screen, or a controller disconnected message. And in Melee's case, it turns off the human player when selecting a character. And you can't turn off the Wii Remote because that's how you exit out of the game. With Devolution being closed source, it has basically no way of getting any better. Enter Nintendont. Sometime in 2015, a newer method of playing GameCube games in Wii Mode was made available. It was very unstable and hardly compatible with any game, but it has the advantage of being open source. And because of that, it grew into something that was actually usable. The Wii shares the same CPU as the GameCube. The same code works on both systems, but both systems have a different memory layout. For example, code that reads the controller sockets on the GameCube won't work on the Wii. This applies to a lot of different hardware aspects of the console, so every game would be broken in some way if you try to load them as they are. Here's a quick look at what happens when you load a game from the disc channel without switching to GameCube mode first. Both Devolution and Nintendont have to patch games to fix them up for Wii Mode. But unlike Devolution, Nintendont is mostly comprised of ARM code that runs on the other CPU that the Wii has. This seems to be the reason why Nintendont doesn't have those performance issues that Devolution has. However, while Nintendont solves some of the problems I mentioned, it also introduces a lot more issues into the mix. So, over the years, I've maintained an old version of Nintendont with the goal of solving as many problems as I can, while also adding some new functionality that others may find useful to have.
Let's get to it, Geo!
In Nintendont, to exit out of a game, you have to do a button combo on the GameCube controller. This combination is known to cause problems in at least one game, but it's also kind of unnecessary to include when you have the entire Wii Remote available to do more commands. Likewise, the power button is used to turn off the console. In Devolution, it's used to exit the game. So, I decided to mimic that behavior here and remove the button combo entirely. When exiting from Nintendont, the image of the game remains on the screen for a few seconds. While not much of a problem, Devolution reacts instantly with a black screen. I wanted to copy this behavior as well, and it's something that I've thought about doing for a while. So what I did was rewrite the bSetBlack function using the homebrew version of libogc, and I stuck it into the reload stub, which is the code that executes when you exit. I think this helps make it feel more responsive, since freezing the image just looks a bit awkward. And in some games like Spider-Man 2, you can see some garbage piling up on the screen. This is something that doesn't really deserve a mention, but it's such a quick fix that I might as well say it. The GameCube has a system setting for the horizontal position, just like on the Wii, and when you enter backwards compatibility mode, this setting carries over. On Nintendont, this setting is hard-coded to 0. Now it will get the proper value from the system configuration file. Normally, Nintendont can change the screen position by patching the video mode, but doing it properly allows for greater compatibility, for example, in games like Super Mario Sunshine or the Nintendo 64 Zelda games. Alright, so here is where it gets more interesting. The biggest obstacle I faced when doing all of this is that every time I came up with an idea that required adding a new setting, I needed to implement those new settings in other programs that support Nintendont, such as USB Loader GX or WiiFlow. To work around this, I determined that the vast majority of settings are a one-time thing. Once you have them on or off, you don't really need to change them frequently. So I decided to make Nintendont look for a text file on the same directory where the game is stored, and this text file can contain every new setting without needing to update any other program. And this allowed me to go deep and support all sorts of features. From simple features such as being able to change the AV encoder's audio volume and being able to turn off the trap filter and composite output, to more useful features like forcing the system menu on exit or completely overwriting any video mode patches. And as you can see from the file name, the text file is called patch.txt, and the reason for this is that this feature evolved into replicating the old game config.txt format, which, if you remember from the old Homebrew days, it was a way to patch games based on their title ID, but only once. As opposed to cheat codes that run constantly alongside the game with a tight 6KB limit, these patches can use several megabytes from the Wii's extra RAM. And they happen to be persistent patches. If you reset the game or the game launches an executable, the patches will always be applied, but only once. Of course, this means that if you're trying to patch relocatable code, then it won't work. But this can still be extremely useful as it basically gives you a lot more control. Let's say you want to take one of Swiss's complex video patches like 240p forcing. You can use the pokeif version of the patching command to ensure the right data is being modified. On a game such as Zelda Ocarina of Time, it will result in the main menu staying in 480i, but the actual game will be in 240p. And this is something that even Swiss can't do. And you can use Try Arcade, which is my way of recycling an existing setting. This setting lets you toggle between coin-operated mode and free play mode for supported Triforce games like Mario Kart Arcade GP. On GameCube titles, it has no purpose, so by writing Try Arcade on the patch file, you can use the Triforce Arcade setting to disable any following patches or settings. You don't want Ocarina of Time to use 240p anymore? Then turn off the Triforce Arcade setting and it will go back to normal. Pretty cool, huh? One of the possibilities I thought to include is a way to make customizable rights using randomization. Sonic Adventure 2 has the option of changing the voice narration on the menu screens. This narration also happens during the Sonic Team logo, but you never hear it because the save file hasn't been loaded yet. With the randomize command, it's possible to specify the exact byte you want to randomize and the range. Check it out.
Sonic Team.
Sonic Team.
You can also make it randomize whether the Japanese or the English voices will be used.
Sonic Team.
ソニックチームじゃ。
If you've seen some of my other videos, then you probably know by now that I'm not the biggest fan of the classic controller, but I do recognize it as a useful aspect of playing GameCube games in Wii Mode since it's the most convenient controller for Wii models that don't support the GameCube ports. The ABXY layout doesn't match the positions of the GameCube controller. To make the controls feel more natural, they are moved around on both Devolution and Nintendont. While Devolution offers a setting to use the correct button placements, Nintendont has you pressing the minus button to toggle between both layouts. I decided to remove this and made it a setting in the patch file instead.
オリジナルカラーのメモリーカードをセット。
Perhaps useless feature is that you can now set the memory card emulation's access delay. After using Devolution's memory card emulation, it was clear that it's slightly better than how it works in Nintendont. It has absolutely no speed limit. Games like Spider-Man 2 save almost instantly, while in Nintendont, it's very slow. My first instinct was to reduce the limit, but not remove it since going too fast is known to break early titles like the Japanese version of The Wind Waker. I figured just going a little faster is enough, but then if some other problem crops up, the user should be able to solve it, so they can now set the delay with the patch file. Let's talk about the original GameCube menu. Definitely one of the biggest advantages Nintendont has over every other method is how it can load the original GameCube main menu. The menu itself has a pretty significant problem. It doesn't support 480p. Swiss, on the other hand, is able to patch the video mode to support 480p, and on top of that, it can also let you choose what the intro jingle will be. I have copied over those patches, so now it's possible to see the menu in 480p, as well as being able to set the jingle from the baby type to the kabuki type, and even random. You know, if you're playing Melee and it's going down, you gotta go with kabuki. Hear me out for a bit. There's one feature that Nintendo has that I don't really like. The nunchuck support. This was implemented as a final resort for people without the necessary controller. While I can see how it may come in handy, it doesn't cover all buttons on the GameCube, leading to a bizarre profile system that requires a lot of experimentation to get right. It adds a lot of bloat to the input code as well. So while I was taking out the nunchuck code, I realized how useless the solo Wii Remote was. In Devolution, the Wii Remote can do all sorts of things, but in Nintendont, all it does is scan for a connected controller. I decided to reuse some of the nunchuck code to basically make it think the Wii Remote is a valid controller. This makes it convenient for exiting by pressing and holding the home button, and then pressing A to confirm. The Wii Remote will continue to act like it usually does in Nintendont. It will scan for the classic controller and turn off after 20 seconds. But when you turn it back on, it will immediately assume you want to use it as a controller. If you have a GameCube controller in port 1, then the Wii Remote will use port 2. With the patch file, you can specify the exact port you want, making it possible to even overwrite the physical controller in port 1. I made a list of games that play more or less correctly with this new controller type. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, Nintendo Puzzle Collection, any title that contains Nintendo's Game Boy Advance emulator, so any demo disc or Pokémon Box, Sonic Mega Collection, Sonic Gems Collection, the Game Gear games in Sonic DX, Bust-A-Move 3000, Namco Museum, and the 50th anniversary version. I think it's a pretty good feature to have. The Wii Remote really helps titles like Sonic Mega Collection, where you had updated releases of these games on the Wii Shop channel, mainly because I found the emulation to be much better in Mega Collection over the Virtual Console versions. The spinning flag post sounds better. It has no sprite flickering, the overall volume is louder, and you have the entire collection wrapped up in this really nice nostalgic presentation. It's missing 240p mode, but it's not like that's much of an obstacle with the new patching system. If you recall, I mentioned the sideways Wiimote support to be useful for Nintendo's GBA emulator. This emulator isn't super compatible and it only works with up to 16MB ROMs. But even so, it's surprisingly decent for the games it does play. Even though we have access to high accuracy emulators like MGVA and can cover up games that dip in frame rate by using GPSP, I thought, at least for a little bit, that making this emulator save properly would come in handy for games such as Final Fantasy, where the audio starts stuttering because the frame rate is too low. I looked at all the variants of this emulator and I believe the Mario vs. Donkey Kong one is the most ideal. It has the highest compatibility and maps every input correctly to the controller. So, in Nintendont, I added a detection for this emulator and it will check the storage device for a save file on the game's directory. If no save file is found, it won't create one. By default, this emulator loads SRAM type of saves, as well as the large flash size for games like Pokémon. Games that use regular flash or EEPROM need to be SRAM patched. For simplicity, saving will only occur when you reset or exit the game. Just like that, you have another method of playing Game Boy Advance games on the Wii. It's even compatible with my recent translation project. The Wii message board allows you to see a record of your daily play times. This is only able to work when the system menu is loaded. This feature is absent from backwards compatibility mode, but it was implemented by Devolution. It works by grabbing the short title from the opening banner. I know most people would probably not get much use out of this one, but I decided to improve upon how it works in Devolution by offering two methods. Method 1 is mimicking Devolution by getting the short title from the game itself. Method 2 is letting the user manually specify the title and subtitle in the patch file. Unlike Devolution, it will not create the log file if it doesn't exist. It also won't write every minute, instead it will only save the moment you exit out of the game. Now that I've shared all the new features, I think it's time to talk about changes in game compatibility. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike is a curious GameCube exclusive title. In Devolution, this game seems to work well enough, but still suffers from excessive loading times and frame drops. In Nintendont, the frame rate and loading times are much improved over every other way to play it. It does, however, have one really bad problem. The HP meter and a few other textures tend to display scrambled, rainbow-like garbage, making it impossible to tell how much HP you have left. Many have reported this issue in the past, but nothing ever came of it. In fact, the main reported issue on the GitHub page was closed due to inactivity. Out of all the nonsense issue reports the project still has open, why close a real acknowledged problem? Now I can't even have the satisfaction of closing this issue myself. Anyway, I fixed the problem and it's quite simple. simple. There's a graphics processor function that breaks when it's used in Wii Mode. The creator of Devolution explains it in perfect detail here. Nintendont already has a patch for this, but it doesn't work on Rebel Strike because that code is compressed. My solution ended up being to inject code into the game so that when the executable is extracted, the game knows it has to patch itself. Devolution doesn't have this problem since every code that's executed is analyzed by the engine and patched if needed. As I said before, Rebel Strike is a pretty unusual title since it's a rather decent game based on a popular franchise, but what's more is that Nintendont is currently the only way to play it in such an improved state, while people who wish to use Dolphin to emulate the game will find it quite impossible. At least until someone goes Luke Skywalker and makes it possible.
That's impossible, even for a computer.
It's not impossible. I used to bullseye womp rats in my T16 back home. They're not much bigger than 2 meters.
Also, here's some weird trivia about the game. It contains the 3 Atari arcade games, so Rebel Strike is technically a compilation title. With Rebel Strike out of the way, I decided to look at a different title that I thought I would never be interested in. This is Pokémon Box Ruby and Sapphire. This is more of a utility than a game. It only has 2 functions. You can store Pokémon from any of the Game Boy Advance titles on the GameCube's memory card, and it also has Adventure Mode, which lets you play Pokémon Ruby or Sapphire on the TV by connecting the Game Boy to the console. Storing Pokémon is known to work, but Adventure Mode is where things go wrong. Even though it's known to work on Devolution, because of course it does, trying it in Nintendont while the connection goes through correctly, the emulated Game Boy stays there as if no game was inserted. Let me just say that this is a rare title that was only sold in like New York or something, and even though I have a Game Boy Advance and the link cable, I've never had Ruby or Sapphire. In short, I have no business trying to fix this problem. But there's something in Pokémon Box that I'm really interested in, so I feel I need to get this title to work so that I can actually take advantage of it. While looking for clues as to why the game never loads, I ran into a post by one of the main developers of Dolphin. And the message is pretty clear. The ROMs are read from an address that happens to conflict with the Wii's secondary RAM known as MEM2. I can't change the Wii's BAT, the block allocation table, but I know I can change the game's PTE, the page table entries. I know what you're thinking. Even if I assume I found the code to modify, how can I test it? Dolphin already works with Pokémon Box, but Dolphin doesn't work with Nintendont. How can I test Pokémon Box without a cartridge for Ruby or Sapphire? It's quite simple. I patched the game to skip all the link cable checking. That way I can make it go straight into the Game Boy Advance emulator. Of course, this means the border is always the default one and the ROM is the original Ruby version. But because of this, I was able to locate all the code that sets the PTEs and change them to a compatible address. And finally fix Pokémon Box once and for all. Fixing Pokémon Box is really a side effect of my real goal, which is to make the official way of playing Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire on the Wii possible for Wii models that can't use the GBA link cable, such as the Wii U. Right now I am compiling a list of patches that one can select from the patch file, allowing the user to select the yellow screen border, the ROM revision, 240p output, and of course, save file handling from the storage device. It's worth noting that this emulator is less compatible than the Mario vs. Donkey Kong one, but this one has the advantage of being professionally tested by Nintendo for playing Pokémon. Okay, we have Star Wars and Pokémon working, so I started looking for other broken games to see if I could do anything about them. Unfortunately, people seem to suck at reporting these games. I wasn't able to replicate any of the other problems I read about, so I decided to move on. And I remember there was sort of a loose end with Nintendont. It has a feature known as the ISO cache. When a game reads from the ISO, Nintendont copies that data to the Wii's extra RAM. It also seems to preload data by guessing. This results in better loading times. The problem though is that it breaks games. Tales of Symphonia is known to hang on a black screen while playing, and any title that uses HPS audio files seems to also break randomly. For a long time, my assumption was, the GameCube doesn't do this, so why should the Wii? Removing the caching feature fixes all those problems, but in a decent amount of titles, it's pretty clear that the loading times are much worse, way worse than even by using the original disc. Making it a setting might provide an acceptable workaround, but I didn't like having the user be aware of this problem, as well as forcing people to use slower loading times. After experimenting with the code, I found that by reducing the size of the cache from 32 megabytes to 3 megabytes, it still gives you really good loading times without breaking Tales of Symphonia or the games that use HPS audio. Whether it completely solves all problems is yet to be seen, as this is a fairly recent change that hasn't been tested much. And well, that's it. I hope people look forward to having yet another way to play Pokémon on the Wii. I realize my build might not be ideal for some users since it's missing some features like the broadband adapter emulation or the game select screen. But I will be sharing all my changes on GitHub so anyone can make use of my code, especially if they want to add the Rebel Strike patches or the Pokémon Box patches to the original project. If you like this type of video, let me know by leaving a comment, or I don't know, subscribe or something. Oh, and leave a like.
Good job.